Hey, I'm Chris, and welcome to episode 20 of the Reunion Church podcast. This is Sunday Recaps, where we discuss a couple key points from the previous service and help you navigate the spiritual formation process. And like we did a couple weeks ago, we're going to switch things around. Since
change the intro again.
I didn't change it again. It's the exact same thing from last week. You pointed out last week. See?
Yeah, you said you were going to change it back, and you did.
I did not say I was going to change it back. I said I was going to keep the change.
No, you didn't.
Anyway, I taught this Sunday. It was awesome. So Andrew's going to interview me. And yeah, I guess I'll just hand over the reins, Andrew, as far as this Sunday and all that goes.
Yeah. Chris, how did it feel to be in Absalom and just try and take over something and change things without running it through the pastor?
First of all, we're not a monarchy or a Moses model. So I can change 2 words. Second of all, it felt awesome to be Absalom in text only.
Yeah, so we're in lesson 9, I think, right now? No,
week 8. Yeah, week 8.
Week 8 of going through this. And it was a really cool week. We had some really good people asking some questions. Just some genuine questions around patience and around this concept of relationships and stuff. Why do you think for most of us who have kind of grown up in the church, this idea of relationship and a relationship with God is kind of old news, but it almost seems like something that is kind of resurging and almost picking back up again? Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think this concept of how important the relationship is, and why do you think it dropped off in the first place, and why do you think it's picking up again?
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably dropped off because for a while the whole corporate church idea was a big thing of like, we're going somewhere, we're having an event, we are doing something, we the community. And I think with this current phase of like deconstructions, people leaving faith, people really evaluating, especially with COVID really impacting people, I think people are reevaluating. Well, actually, I didn't really feel like I belonged in the first place. Now that I think about it, I just went and did stuff. Like I didn't actually have what does it mean to have a relationship? And I think that's where a lot of people are taking, instead of a community focus, which has like probably been like the last 10 years, I'd say. And these last couple years, people are shifting to the more personal of like, well, what does God mean to me? Who even is God? Like, do I even know him? And if so, what does a relationship even look like? Because I don't know. No one told me. So that's why I think the pendulum's kind of swung that way. But it could be a variety of reasons as well besides that.
What do you mean that no one told me what a relationship looks like? And I think you touched on this a little bit, but expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, so a lot of people in church, we talk about this all the time, where you get saved, you learn the do's and don'ts of Christianity, and then you're just kind of like, all right, you got it. Like, you're good. Like, all right, now do this and do that, go to this thing, attend this seminar. Like, there's no like someone holding you by the hand and walking you through of like, all right, here's what grace is. Here's who God really is. Here's, like just walking you through those basic questions that take a long time to navigate. Like the fact that we even have a 12-week study on grace just shows how important this idea is that a lot of people overlook. And I think having a relationship, just the idea of a relationship with God, is one of those big ideas of like, we don't actually tell people what that looks like, what it means to have a relationship with God. Because, he's not like our best friend. We're not married to him, but it's like, there's no other relationship like it. So like when people get saved, they just, I think, kind of skip over that because it's too difficult to kind of navigate on their own. Like no one's there to kind of guide them through it.
Do you think there's also, maybe some of this confusion around a relationship with God because of how, just how we have relationships in general nowadays has changed?
Yeah. I think, hookup culture, like, people using Tinder and all that stuff, like just using apps to connect with people, just using social media to connect with people now versus meeting in person. That's changed a lot of stuff.
Because you're on an app, right?
I am.
Yeah.
And it changes everything about the dynamic. It's like ordering a DoorDash, but it's a person. It's like the craziest thing. But you can't do that with God. Like you can't just show up.
You can't DoorDash God. Yeah.
You cannot DoorDash God.
That's
you
a
can
good
Bumble
quote.
people, but you cannot DoorDash God.
Yeah. We Katie,
Um,
you need to share that on Instagram, please, when you hear
yeah,
this.
that'll be my
Please.
Bumble quote. Actually, I'll change my Bumble quote to that. But like even the way we interact socially has changed everything. And I think that's where people are really confused as far as like, well, how do I relate with God? Because he can't just order God to show up. He can't just walk right in and then we hang out, you know? God's beyond everything that we're physically located in. He's not a physical being like us. So he is ever present, always there. So what does that look like? Because we're not used to that, where we're kind of like in our own little bubbles most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even like this last year has probably messed with a lot of like how people have relationships, communicate, deal with things, deal with conflict, anything like that itself. I mean, just the fact of how people have dealt with 2020 and are still trying to deal with some of the conflicts itself kind of shows that I don't think people understand the concepts of relationships usually. Um, where I don't think people know how to kind of work through a relationship or how to keep a relationship going,
Yeah.
necessarily. So when you were kind of walking through, and even in some of our questions, we kind of brought up like dating, relationships, and some of those things. So with that kind of in mind, like what is the like correlation between a dating relationship, the dating relationships in today's day and age, or even just friendships in general? Like, what is the correlation between those relationships, our relationship with God, how we view God in the Bible, how we view this relationship and with grace itself?
Mhm.
What are some of the correlations that we're kind of seeing with that?
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people are kind of approaching God in a couple ways. Like there's the one of like the buddy God of like, God's my buddy. He's my best friend. He's like my bro. And that's not really an appropriate way of having a relationship with God, because if you look anywhere in the Bible, there's always this fear of God, this fear of the Lord, this kind of reverence for God, right? It's like this acknowledgement that he's different and beyond me and in so many ways, you know. So he's not equal to me like a best friend would be.
Do you think that fear of God is just simply of what you were kind of saying of like he's different, or what is that fear of God like? Why does that change of like a buddy relationship?
Yeah, and I'll use an analogy for example. So there's one time where my dad and I were at a gas station, or I think it was a gas station, and Denzel Washington walked in, right? And the moment that guy walked in, everyone had this sort of reverence as soon as he entered the room of like, oh, holy crap, that's Denzel Washington. Like this was back in California. And it's kind of this unsaid reverence, this unsaid respect of like, oh, this guy's like really famous, really powerful in a way, I guess, really
Is that because he
influential.
was playing Nick Cage?
Do you know who Denzel Washington is? Now,
No.
now I'm very curious who you think Denzel Washington is.
I thought Nick Cage was the really big guy in the Netflix movies.
No, no, no. I have so many questions, but we're not even going to get there. Um, but I think God is kind of like that way of like when God is really in a space, like when you're having worship, for instance, everyone in the room can notice it. Everyone feels it. And it's not like a dating relationship, because in that sense too, the two people in that relationship are equals, right? They're trying to learn who they are and all that, but it's not a friendship either. It's kind of beyond that, you know, as you touched on last night as well. So I think the best way we can kind of approach our relationship with God is marriage, because that's what Paul and a lot of people in the Bible kind of refer to. Jesus refers it to, you know, we're the bride of Christ. Paul in Ephesians 5 talks about how, you know, Adam and Eve, just like they were two who became one, we, the church, are becoming one with Christ. We're remaining with him. So if anything, marriage is probably the best illustration, but even Paul in the same chapter of Ephesians 5 is like, this is the best one we have, because there's nothing quite like a relationship with God. And that's kind of a more accurate translation of the end of Ephesians, but essentially marriage is the best illustration that we have to explain this mystery.
Gotcha. Yeah, I like that. Did Denzel Washington play Blade?
Oh my gosh. No. He there's so much wrong with you. He was in Training Day. He was in Remember the Titans. You don't even know that one.
I saw it once a long, long time ago.
Okay. Well, yeah, you know what? This is useless. Wesley Snipes was Blade. You know who that is.
Okay, yep. Okay, now yeah. That's
Yeah.
right. No one likes Wesley Snipes.
Well, no, they do.
Oh. Anyways, before before I get us into trouble as a church,
Yeah.
we
Transition.
we we talked about this concept of like in us and who Christ is in us, right? Why is that an important phrase? Why, like, and we spent a lot of time talking about that. The group had a lot to talk about it. Why is that important?
Yeah. Well, going back to the marriage thing, the relationship with God is kind of beyond marriage in a lot of ways. And that whole in us kind of explains that of like, there's the Christianese word of we need to abide in him, we need to remain in him. But like the reason Jesus used all these analogies and all these parables was to kind of explain something that's just so high concept that like words don't even help. Like abide and all that doesn't really make sense. And I think the best explanation is probably John 15, where Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches, you know, I and you and me sort of thing. Like there's this connection, right?
Yeah.
And if you know anything, like, I mean, Linda kind of put us in our place, but we don't know anything about plants. Like I know they come from the ground, fruits also come from the ground, and that's all I know. But there's one of the people in our group was explaining how there's a specific way in first century Judaism where they would do they would grow, oil press, oil vine, or sorry, grapevines and all of this, like all the plants. They had a specific way of farming to get the best out of the branches by staying closest to the source, the vine itself. And that's kind of like our relationship with God of like everything that we have is from God. It's kind of in a way a one-way street, whereas a relationship is a 50-50. It's a back and forth. But our relationship with God is no. He has all of grace. We don't have any. And he's giving us all of grace all the time. He's giving us access to it all the time. All of his love, all of his power, all of his kindness, gentleness. And then we pass that on to somebody else. We share that, like we don't give people grace. We just extend the grace that God's given us to other people, when we forgive, when we love on other people. So that's probably the best analogy. But again, there's a reason Jesus used parables because this stuff's really hard to grasp.
Yeah. And I think sometimes that might be something that's a little bit hard for us to sometimes kind of understand is like, man, what is why are we talking about a relationship and why are we talking about grace? Like what is the connection? Like, why is that so important for us to kind of bring these two about? What is the connection? Like we've been spending 8 weeks talking through grace and we saw the connection on how grace works with, the resurrection and how grace works with sacrifice and how grace works with, the Old Testament and the New Testament and all these, but then we're pausing and talking through a relationship. Why? Like, how does grace and relationship kind of work together?
Yeah. Well, grace is fundamentally a personal thing. And I think to think of the two promises that God made in the Old Testament, New Testament, is the Old Testament was really this desire to gain, right? The people of Israel, the people in the Old Testament were trying to gain something that other countries and cultures didn't have, which was access to God. And in the New Testament, Jesus kind of fulfilled that old promise and said, hey, I have a new promise. Here's something where I'm going to give you something. It's the desire to give, where God is giving. We can only give to someone personally, like I can gain something, like we were just talking about benefits at work. I gain benefits from my job, but they can't give me grace necessarily. That's more of a personal interaction. And what God's kind of been doing through the centuries is going from, communal connection where large groups of people, they gather to get close to God. And as time has gone on, especially when Jesus arrived, things became more personal, and then eventually intimate of no, you can talk to God at any point. You don't need anybody there to be the middleman, and grace is a part of that process too.
I think kind of like feeding off of your illustration, like benefits, benefits you earn, right?
Right.
Like you get those because, hey, you're working here. The minute you stop working here, guess what? You're out, right?
Right.
Like the minute you stop putting in the work, you're not going to get into this, and you contribute into them, right? Hey, you
Yeah.
pay this, then you get this. You pay this
Yeah.
amount. If you don't pay this amount, then you don't get this. And you're reading into it, you're like, oh man, there's so many complicated things. How much should I pay into this? Am I planning to go to the hospital a lot this year? I don't know. Like, I don't know what I should be doing, And so it's a give and take component, right? And that's works.
Yeah. Very transactional.
Which is exactly what, the Old Testament was like trying to show of like, hey, this isn't what you want to do. This sucks, right? You don't want to do this. But then what he uses is the actual in the New Testament and in the Old Testament is an inheritance, right? Whereas the inheritance, you didn't do anything
right
to receive that. You were just born, and you did nothing to actually really kind of receive that, even if you're a crappy part of the family, if you're the immediate part of the family, you're usually receiving something as the inheritance.
Yeah.
Like the absolute garbage son of the family, you'll usually receive something.
Yeah.
Especially in that culture, you would receive something. Like you couldn't really unreceive the inheritance. And if depending on where you were born, which again you had nothing to kind of do with, you would receive more of the inheritance and stuff too, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like the idea of like a relationship of like, hey, just because you're his, you receive. And so this idea of in us, like we receive this grace, we receive this inheritance itself. So because sometimes we talk about, I think we go through and we're talking about the resurrection, and we're talking about the Old Testament and the New Testament, and all this can be pretty head heavy.
Yeah.
It's like, what does that actually like? How does that actually work in my life? Why don't we actually apply this to like actual relationships?
Yeah.
Which sometimes we like, everyone has relationships, whether positive or negative, and experiences with those. And so usually we can try and apply that and understand how grace works a little bit further in there,
Yeah. And actually you just reminded me of a fun interaction that my brother had with one of his sons, who is complaining that, why does he have, why are things the way they are in this house? Why are the rules the way they are and stuff? He's like, why can't I have this? Well, because I gave you this. I gave you a house. I gave you food. I give you water. I give you all these things, first acknowledge this, and then we'll think about buying this new car for my 3-year-old son. This was just a hilarious interaction that my brother had with his 3-year-old son, and
he wanted
just
a car.
Couldn't get it. Yeah, he likes those like little toy cars that you pull it back and then it flies.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah. And him trying to explain to a 3-year-old, you have so much already. Like, you don't need this $4 Hot Wheels car. Like, you have a home. I have an actual car. Like, you have a bike if you want to go fast. Like, you've inherited all this stuff. You didn't have to do anything. I just gave it to you. And just watching my older brother, John, like explain this to his 3-year-old son was just hilarious. And it's kind of like how we are with God, of like, God, why don't I have this or that? It's like, you have grace. You have grace. Like, you get all of grace all the time. Like, how is that not enough? And I just thought it was a hilarious parallel.
I like that. Yeah. Of like, the God, get me through this battle. This is such a hard, I want my Boaz. How about my relationship?
Right.
God's just, you have everything you need plus more.
Right.
And we, like, one of my favorite things that we kind of talked about, and I used Ben as another illustration, as we were talking about like the riches according to their riches. Yeah. And the riches of Ben and the riches of like Bill Gates. And we kind of compared and contrast, like, and I think we read over verses like that pretty easily. What's the importance of us like actually breaking those down and actually looking into, like, when God says according to my riches, or when Paul says according to his riches, and those type of things? Like, what's what's the importance? It's like slowing down and actually, like we took time and slowed down on, again, some very popular verses that we've probably read multiple times. We were like, hey, let's break this down and actually really look at this as a group. Like, what's the importance in like that phrase specifically?
Yeah, well, I think it's just to apply to like people that host parties, right? There's certain people, like we all have that friend that has the really nice house. When they invite you over for a party, like, oh, I'm going to a really nice house. I'm going to hang out. There's probably a pool table. They probably have a flat screen TV for the big game if we go over. They have all of these riches that I'm going to benefit from. I just have to show up. Like I'm invited, I get to go, I get to benefit. And then we have that other friend that has like a mattress on the floor, maybe a couch. And they're like, yeah, let's watch the game at my house. I was like, I like this guy's riches more to watch the big game. Like I'd rather go to my millionaire friend than this guy that just moved out or whatever, like we know the difference, and when it comes to God, grace isn't like some outside source of like, oh, God's got this limited amount in the grace bank and he only has so much for everybody. So you better come get some. It's more of, no, grace is from God, literally directly from God. So not only is he the source of grace, but he gives it as well. And since he made everything, his riches are the universe and beyond, it's everything. His riches are, we can't even fathom, how rich God is. And the fact that he would give all of his riches to us is just something else.
Yeah. Like I immediately think of like in youth ministry, you're always trying to get like something cheap because the pastors usually don't give you a budget. And so I thought of like our first youth leader getaway trip where, according to my buddy's riches, he's like, yeah, man, I got a cabin you can use. And it was the nastiest shack I had ever been part of.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
It like plywood screwed together and like expired mac and cheese
in the mountains too, right? You're like way out there.
Way out there. way out there.
Nice.
Like the first night, I like hear a shower going and like there was 2 cabins. I was like, whoa. Why is the shower going? And like all the guys, we snuggled on a bed to try and keep warm because there's no heat.
Nice.
And so we're like, who's in the shower? Did one of the girl leaders come over here to shower? What the heck are they thinking? And then like my body jumps up and he's like, oh no. And there's like a foot of water.
Oh my gosh.
Because the pipes had burst because they were like rusted and everything. And because it was just an old nasty. So it was nice. It was like, oh, cool, man. Thanks.
Yeah.
But then like our last, like when we started putting together our church, Bethany, the Tranthams have a really, really nice cabin, but I didn't know that. And so she's all like, hey, I have this really nice cabin. You can use it. And I'm like asking her questions. I'm like, okay, is it really nice? Can I do this? She's like, it's a really freaking nice cabin. And then, oh, right. According to like the Tranthams riches, which was like, oh, wow, they went all out. This was really, it meant a whole lot more.
Right. Much more than your buddy.
Yeah.
Who just built this. Yeah.
And then like, it was an old family, like tradition cabin. And like, I mean, he's like redneck as junk. I mean, he is just like a redneck guy, hardcore. And I think sometimes when we're looking at grace and what God offers us, like the gifts and callings that he offers us, we'll look at that the same way into our previous experiences of being like, what I've received from other people, from like other Christians, hasn't been that great of grace. And what I've received from other, pastors hasn't been that grace, or the relationships I received from other people haven't been that great. So I don't know how great this is. Well, but it was according to their riches of what they could give. And as what we've said over and over again, we suck. Like we don't have any riches in our own. Yeah. And so when we try to offer grace in our own ability, when we try to offer, any help, any service in our own, it sucks. And people are like, this Christianity thing, this thing isn't great, right? Because our riches suck. They're nothing. But when we offer them back of like, hey, no, this is what God's riches are, what God can actually offer, it is so much more. Like, yeah, but it changed. And so I think sometimes we have to get used to that concept of letting that go and letting that actually trusting what God's riches actually really are and pointing people towards his riches instead of our own experiences as well, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
we had a lot of questions and a lot of things that kind of went through where people could kind of explore what this in us kind of meant. And when Christ is in us, like, and we have this relationship, there's a lot of benefits that we kind of get through. And so we challenged everyone. I was like, hey guys, go through this homework, kind of go through this. So if you're part of Reunion Church and you have the book plan, like definitely go through some of these questions, go through some of these things here. But he talks through, like, we have about 6 different things that we get access through Christ because we are in Christ. And I'd like you to kind of speak on one of them that really kind of talks a lot to you. But it's like the fruit of the Spirit, a relational love, that we're grounded in love, the knowledge of God that is eternal life, that wisdom that actually comes from God, knowing God continuously, like that continuous knowledge of knowing God. Which one would you like to get? Like, would you choose of like, man, like that's a huge like blessing for us to actually receive, a huge gift?
Yeah, I think just because I see this a lot in my life, the discernment wisdom one always stands out to me of like, it's like cheating in life in a way of like the awareness that God can give us who are Christians of like, no, this is how you should see the world. Like, this is what's really going on. This is what, like if you've ever had this moment, which sounds crazy unless you've have the gift of discernment or you've just discerned something before of like, oh, I need to say this right now to this person, you know? I mean, sometimes it happens to us of, oh, you know what? I need to talk to that person. Or, you know what? Something in this social situation is not what it seems. I need to kind of address it. You know, there's something off, you know? And I think it's just so cool when that happens. Like, you know, one person who's phenomenal at it is actually my dad. And does a lot of prison ministry and stuff. And there's one job where he got hired on and he could just tell like, I don't know, there's something off about this job. And then lo and behold, a year later, the guy that was trying to hire him ended up murdering someone, ended up being like this crazy criminal that no one knew in secret. And my dad was like, wow, I really dodged a bullet there. And it's just one of those crazy situations of like, without discernment, you just wouldn't know stuff like that, you know, no crazy, or even good situations too, of like, same story with my dad, where he discerned that a couple was pregnant and they didn't announce it to anybody. He's like, or it was actually before they were pregnant, we're like, you're going to have another son and you're going to name him this. And they're like, we're not planning on having another kid. And then they ended up having another kid like a couple years down the road. So it can be a beautiful and a crazy life-saving thing.
So you didn't just try to guess if a woman was pregnant?
No, he did not just guess. He knew. He knew before they were pregnant.
That's good.
Yeah.
I've done
very distinct line, but
yeah.
Yeah, I think discernment, just the wisdom of God, is crazy. Like just the way it forms how you see the world just blows my mind.
Yeah. So when we're talking about abiding, and I think we can kind of wrap up here, but what are some ways that, you know, we as Christians can kind of put, you know, abiding or remaining in Christ into practice into our daily lives?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an easy practice in some ways, and then depending on the context, maybe more difficult. But like, as far as the easy ways, like we talk about this all the time, just going for a walk and being with God, of, you know, maybe you have some music to kind of just, you know, help you think. Some people like having music, some people no music, but just taking a walk and talking to God that way, just taking a break, taking a transition of like, all right, I'm going to take 10 to 15, reconnect, abide with God. Some people, it's more spiritual stuff of like prayer, of, you know, community with a friend. Like abiding is it's a long-term process that has a lot of outlets, and everyone's going to have their preferred outlet on that. Like I know for me, you know, the walks are amazing. And then just prayer. Like if I just get some time of like, man, I need a quick 5 and I'm just going to go pray. Other people, it's hours and hours in the word. And I have no idea how people do that. It doesn't make any sense to me. But then there's people that are like, yeah, I could read the Bible all day. And I'm like, I could read it for like 4 minutes and then I'm fried. You know, that's not abiding for me. You know, taking time with your kids. Like everyone's wired differently and knows what it means to abide with God and enjoy the things of earth and to grow closer to him. And it's just a matter of knowing who you are and knowing who God is to figure out where that relationship needs to grow and connect more with God.
Yeah. I think there is one question that we have kind of odd in here that's a homework question that's kind of in the middle, but I think it ties into the relationship components themselves, because I think it's something that people really confuse in their relationship with God themselves. And it's that we make the statement that God is never angry with you. Like his wrath is not for the believer. Why is that important for a Christian to understand? And why do we make that statement? Like, why do we say that?
Yeah. And I think that one's tough too, because there's like a lot of jokes now of like, hate the sin, not the sinner. And then people kind of joke about that of like, yeah, okay, find me a Christian that actually lives that out, because I feel like I'm pretty hated and judged right now.
Right.
You know, like there's a lot of responses like that. And rightly so, because again, Christians are terrible people, just like everybody else. But what's really being said there is God hates the fact that something he created has been damaged, has been hurt, has been corrupted by the consequences of Adam and Eve, of something way down the line, or even a current situation like, hey, I warned you. I really didn't want that to happen. You know, kind of like, again, going back to my brother John, when his other son decided to ride his bike without a helmet and he flew off the bike and hit his head. And my brother's like, dude, I told you, I didn't want you to get hurt. Like, I didn't want you to get harmed. You know, I was warning you. I was trying to help you. So God's wrath is not towards the person, but more so maybe not the situation, but maybe the thing that's the sin itself, you know, the thing that's against how God planned on things to be, how God made things to be. And sin is
his wrath is against that are any that are not his.
Right.
Like if you're his wrath isn't for you.
Yeah.
And I know some people like, oh, that's not biblical. So it's like, well,
it's totally biblical. You ever go to a sports game with one of your kids and the opposing team, you're like, oh, I hate that punk on the opposing team. It's not your kid. Every parent has that. Every parent. I have it as a uncle, just watching my nephews play sports. I'm like, I hate that other team. All of my wrath is towards that 3 to 4 year old soccer team. And just this burning in my bosom against them. You know, everybody's faced that, you know, let's be real.
Yeah. And like the reality, because they're your like family.
Right.
And like when you have the Holy Spirit in you, like,
yeah,
God can't pour out his wrath on his own.
Yeah.
Like how would that be biblical? How would God pour out his wrath where the Spirit already dwells?
Yeah.
That isn't God's wrath is against his own. Like that doesn't theologically, how does that make sense? Like how would you wrap your mind around that, you know? So but why is that important? Like why is it important that we understand like, hey, he's not angry with you. His wrath, he's not doing this to you out of wrath, you know?
Right.
Why is that important for the Christian to understand?
Yeah, well, it's because like our culture just tells us like, you know, that there's a stereotype of like the angry God complex of like God's angry at you and he hates you. And if you don't do what he says, then he's going to kill you and murder you and send you to hell and all this stuff. It's like, not really. Like he didn't even make hell for you. Like it was like, we talked about that last night. That was made for the angels that, you know, disagreed with his plan. He's like, okay, here's a spot where you guys can hang out away from me, you know? But like for people, like the whole plan was that he could be with us. You know, one verse that I love in Genesis is that he walked in the garden with Adam. And if you look at that verse in Genesis, it's a physical walking in the garden. It's the first time we see Jesus mentioned in the Bible implicitly, where he's literally walking with Adam. Hey, tell me about your day. Tell me about your life. I want to be here with you. Abide with me, remain with me, you know, like we were made for that connection. And when we're with him, things fall into place the way they should be, you know, as we are his own.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, the wrath aspect of it too, is that we will feel like God's against us personally in that moment. of,
Yeah.
"Hey, well, I'm going through a hard time. Why am I going through this divorce? Why are my kids being rebellious? Why am I losing my job?" And it's very easy for us to have almost like a Job moment where we feel like God's wrath is against us, and we have our friends who might be telling us like, and we might be thinking in ourselves like, "Oh, I've done something wrong. God is wrathful against me." And it's like, no,
Yeah.
he's not wrathful against you. He's not distant. He's right there with you in this,
Yeah.
right? And so when he's right there with you, that changes how you can walk through in that moment. Like God's
Mhm.
there with you. You're not having to do this alone. You're not having
Right.
to go through whatever situation that might be on your own, because the Holy Spirit's still with you. The Holy Spirit hasn't left you. You don't have to doubt your salvation going through this hardship, going through whatever it might
Mhm.
be. God cares about your justification and your sanctification and him seeing that through. And so whatever you're going through, God's like, "Hey, you don't have anything more to worry about. My wrath isn't for you. My
Yeah.
wrath are for those who are against me. Yeah, and I am against them, but I am not against you."
Right.
And so you can kind of walk in peace with that together with him in whatever situation that is, and just be confident that like God is not pouring out this thing against you in anger, and that there's a time where it will end. There's a season, and there's something that he will work out for you. Wrath is not something that's like, "Oh, this is good. This is something good for me that will work out in the end." Wrath
Yeah.
sucks, right?
Yeah.
Like, so, but that's the concept of the relationship itself. So,
Mhm.
um, awesome. So we got a couple more weeks going into this here. Next week, we have our boy Justin teaching a little bit.
Yep.
A few things that I'll be talking about as well in that. As we wrap up, what's our response around humility and faith, and what humility and faith really means, and how that actually kind of plays in a little bit. And we're talking about primarily just around the concept of faith itself. But there's also a few things that we should be kind of marking up on our calendars for anyone that goes to a Reunion Church or is interested in kind of helping us out. What are those things that you're clearly pulling up as your screen got brighter?
I totally remembered. I didn't. I have them written down right here. First things first, Reunion Church is not doing anything for Thanksgiving. We kind of talked about it as a team, and we just wanted to let you know that we think that's more of a family day. So take the day, take the holiday, spend it with your close ones and loved ones. Reunion Church is not doing anything for Thanksgiving. With
And
that
that
said,
Sunday of Thanksgiving.
yeah, or the Sunday of Thanksgiving. So November 28th is the Sunday after Thanksgiving. We won't be meeting. Um, with that said, again, we've got our women's discipleship groups every Wednesday and Saturday. If you want details more about that, what that looks like, contact Hannah Morrison and she'll give you all the details there. And then we do have a Christmas Eve service, though. Unlike Thanksgiving, we will have a Christmas Eve service coming up on Friday the 24th, of course, on Christmas Eve. Date, location, and time and all that will be figured out in the coming weeks, but just keep that on your calendars. There will be something that Reunion Church is doing for Christmas and the holiday that's coming up. And then lastly, as we've been sharing in the last couple of weeks, thank you for your continued support, whether it's financial through tithing or whether it's prayer. We really appreciate it. And the fact that we're growing and growing and growing has its benefits, but it also has its negatives of, man, we need a new space. So pray for us. You can give on our website to help support and help us get a location that we can afford to fit all the people that want to show up to our church. And it's definitely been a process. So with that said, we will talk to you guys next Sunday as Justin Glass teaches on week 9 of Grace Talk. And until then, we'll see you guys later.